And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for Deborah Kobylt Live. With me today is Shannon Cohn. I'm so excited to have her on our show. Social impact producer and filmmaker, also an attorney, and director of this film, Below the Belt, an incredible film about the journey of four people with endometriosis. And for anyone listening to this, male or female, this is a disease that really affects over 200 million people worldwide. Many people go undetected. It's painful, it's difficult, and Shannon is here to talk all about it. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, first let's start with a question that I want to know, because even a part of me didn't quite realize, what is endometriosis? And then I'm going to ask you, how do we even identify it? Go ahead.
Yes. So endometriosis. And first of all, for anybody watching, listening, don't stop watching because you hear this weird word, or don't stop listening.
Right.
Because you may think, oh, well, I've never heard of that. I don't care about that. That doesn't apply to me. And you could not be more wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Literally everyone is affected by this disease. You either have it knowingly or unknowingly, or you know and love someone who has it. It is arguably the most common devastating disease that most people have never heard of. It affects an average of 1 in 9 girls, women, and gender expansive individuals. So that equates to about 200 million people on the planet.
Yeah.
I can go into some more numbers in a minute, but I'll explain kind of what it actually is. So endometriosis is when tissue that's similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus and other parts of the body. A lot of people think that it's just in the pelvis that it grows, but that actually is not true. Endometriosis has been found in every organ in the body, in the lungs, in the spleen, in the liver, in the brain, in the eyes. So that's what it is. Pathologically, that's what the actual biology of the disease is. And the symptoms, I can just go on into that. Usually the symptoms are debilitating periods. That is common. Periods that listen, we all have had painful periods. I mean, that's just a part of life, The distinction is, if you have pain that's so intense that you can take Tylenol or acetaminophen or ibuprofen or whatever, and it doesn't really hit it, or you have pain that interferes with your daily life in some way so that you can't do the things that you want to do. So going to school, playing sports, going out with your friends, going on a date. If you have pain that actually prevents you from doing those things, that is not normal. Okay. Yeah. Other common symptoms are actually GI symptoms. A lot of people don't realize that the most common first symptom of endometriosis is actually GI symptoms. It was my first symptom. Before I even had my period, I had like kind of cyclical stomach aches. I would tell my mom and my dad, like, oh, my stomach hurts. And my stomach, it was so bad, it really would hurt. And we kind of chased symptoms a bit, GI, and going to specialists, and tried, food sensitivities, and nothing ever really clicked. So it's kind of like this unknown. So GI symptoms, very common: fatigue, migraines, depression, usually not necessarily as a symptom, but because of when you have these symptoms, like it can be affected. There's a lot of unknowns. And then beyond that, urinary symptoms, painful sex, that's a common symptom, where you don't really have anything, but all of a sudden when you're having sex, it gets really painful and you can't find, the cause. So all of these things can be indicative of endometriosis. And another reason why people should care about it, actually, 50% of infertility in the country, in the world, are actually due to this disease. So whether you're male or female, and many of us experience infertility at one point in our lives when we're ready to have a family, half of the cases are due to this disease, with the very weird sounding word.
Wow. Now let me ask you this, lesions. Let's talk about lesions, because I read about that. I didn't know about that either. So you said that you can have endometriosis in the brain, in the liver. For now, just for this question, I'd like to keep it to, parts of, female parts, right? Lesions, where do these lesions, where are they? And then how do you detect them? Because I believe that you can't really see them very well with an MRI, right? Or an ultrasound. So how do we even know that we have these lesions in the first place?
Yes. So as of right now, we don't have any definitive ways to diagnose it beyond having surgery. The surgeon cuts out the lesion, sends it to pathology. The pathologist confirms, yes, it's endometriosis. That's the only way at present to definitively diagnose. Yes, with imaging, ultrasound with a really, highly skilled and specialized technician looking at the ultrasound, MRIs, CAT scans, they probably won't show a lot. They may show really large lesions or something called endometriomas, which are when endometriosis grows in the ovary and looks like a big cyst. You can see that.
Right.
But I caution people when, if you have endometriosis and someone says, oh, let's go get, a scan, and they get an MRI and everything's clear and they come back and say, oh, you don't have endometriosis, your scan's normal. Before I had surgery, I had actually a couple of MRIs, both were clear, nothing showed up. And then I had surgery and I had stage 4 endometriosis.
Wow. And you had surgery to diagnose, right? Because nothing was working. So you had the surgery, investigative surgery, if you will. Now, at that time, did they remove the lesions at the same time?
Yes. And I will say, I got pretty lucky. I say that relatively speaking. Listen, I first had symptoms of endometriosis when I was 16. I didn't hear the word until I was 29 years old. So I went 13 years, and we can talk about there's an average diagnostic delay with this disease of 10 years, and people see an average of 8 doctors before they even hear the word. And I definitely hit that number. I think I exceeded 8 for sure. But so what happened is, for me, I was living in New York City. I was in film school at NYU actually. And I was living downtown, and I literally Googled OBGYN near me. You go and you're like, I knew I was having a lot of pelvic pain. I literally was like, OBGYN near me. And something came up, a couple blocks away, and I just called and made an appointment. So I went in, and I was wearing yoga pants 24/7 at this point. I just felt like my insides were on fire, and it made no sense. I was barely eating. So it wasn't food, it was really debilitating. And I was trying to, go to a very demanding, graduate school at this point. And I walked in, I told the OBGYN all of my symptoms. And she looked at me and said, I think you have endometriosis and we need to do surgery. So, and I was like, what? And like everybody, when you hear this word, I went straight home and I was like, endometriosis. I was like misspelling it. I was like, what did she just tell me it was, And of course, like everything, when you start Googling things, it was terrifying. It talked about all of the infertility. I was 29 at the time. I wasn't married, but I was thinking about, it was that point in my life where I was like, I do want to have children, I guess, at some point. But then it was telling me all these scary numbers. So anyway, so I had surgery, and I thought it was going to be like an outpatient surgery, nothing. We did not schedule surgery, like a hospital stay. I woke up 8 hours later in the recovery, and I was in the hospital for 5 days.
Why?
She just said endometriosis was everywhere. It was that she almost had to do a bowel resection. It had almost infiltrated my bowel. It was all over my pelvis, everything, like my organs were fused together. I had my bowel was stuck to my ovary. she had to bring in a general surgeon to help her, just because she's an incredibly skilled gynecologic surgeon, but it was actually very responsible, because when my bowel was involved, she brought in someone who was a specialist and does, surgery on the bowel. So, I will say it was kind of incredible, because listen, this was a few years ago now, but I will say for the first time, I was lying in my hospital bed for days on end, and I did not hurt. Like I had a morphine pumped, a morphine pump hooked up, and
that'll help.
Right. Well, I hit it 2 times in 5 days. That was it. And those were in the first 24 hours. And then I didn't really need it.
Let me ask you this. these were lesions and they were everywhere. And what do these
Yeah.
lesions look like? Are they little lesions? Are they big lesions? You said
Yeah.
earlier that they look kind of like cysts. Do they look like cysts? And then they were, in a way, gluing your organs together? Is that what happened?
Mm-hmm. Well,
Wow.
endometriosis has a lot of different appearances. And this is
Yeah,
when we get into kind of the medical system not really being well equipped to deal with this disease, is
exactly.
because in medical schools, like when medical students are taught kind of that it's like these black powder burn lesions that, you just kind of see like little black dots in the pelvis or in the pelvic cavity. And that is one way it manifests, but it can be blue, it can be black, it can be red, it can be clear, it can be white and fibrotic. So the vast majority of OBGYNs, of general surgeons, don't know the many different appearances of endometriosis. It can be all of those colors. I know that specialists have told me, I'm not a medical doctor, but I have been told by endometriosis specialists that many times they find the clear endometriosis lesions in teenagers, for example, or younger patients. And the white fibrotic lesions that have been there longer are found in older patients. And what happens is, we know that inflammation drives endometriosis, like inflammation drives a lot of health issues in our
Right.
society,
Hmm.
So a lot of people have found relief, and I myself found relief by following like an anti-inflammatory diet, cutting sugar, cutting, flour products, cutting a lot of the foods that I love. But at the
Right.
same time, like, I really loved feeling better. I loved that more,
Yeah.
so I follow kind of a 90-10 rule, and I did acupuncture and herbs and yoga and meditation. But I will say all of those things are really great, but the key is I had the right kind of surgery, which is called excision surgery. And I'll share. Okay, so if you have endometriosis and you go see your doctor, um, the odds are that your OBGYN, as lovely as he or she may be, and they may be really, really good at delivering babies and other, doing pap smears, all of the other things that we have to go throughout. The reality is they likely did not receive the training to actually cut out the lesions and get them out of your body. They probably learned ablation, which is when they take a laser and burn off the surface of the lesion. And let me ask you this, Deborah. Okay, let's say, this is an analogy I use a lot. If you have cancer and you have a tumor in your body, would you want a general surgeon to go in and laser off the top of that tumor and maybe never know if they got all of it? Or would you want to be referred to a specialist who operates, on tumors all the time, every day, all day, who has the skill to go in and cut out that tumor and know that they got it? They got all of it. That's what we're dealing with here. Is the vast majority of patients who have endometriosis are going to see their OBGYNs who are very good meaning, trying to well-meaning, trying to do a good job, but they just don't have the requisite skill set, the vast majority of them, to cut it out. So repeat surgeries are very common.
Well, your film really drove that home, right? You follow four individuals with totally different circumstances and what they went through with the tremendous pain, different ages as well. I also like that you involved men in this conversation as well, right? That young girl's dad, I thought, was so lovely with her, and he stayed with her until she found the right care. I really thought that that was magnificent to see that, because this is everybody's issue, right? Because it does eventually affect every person, this disease. So, but you were one of the lucky ones. You had a doctor who identified and then decided to probe further. But what do you do, like in the case where people are not getting diagnosed and they go years and years? And to your point, it could be up to 8 years until they're diagnosed. What do you do?
It's a tricky situation. I mean, we need better education for both patients and providers, so that when people go into that first provider, that frontline provider, they're called, that the ER doctor, the pediatrician, the OBGYN, the school nurse, that when they are sharing their symptoms, all of those providers, when they're thinking about all the things it can be, endometriosis comes on that list, because it is so pervasive, so incredibly pervasive. So, I mean, what does a patient do? I mean, honestly, with the way things are right now, I would say go online. they're really informed patient groups who are doing incredible work, run by, board certified patient advocates, run by registered nurses who can point you in the right direction. The same treatment likely doesn't work for everyone because endometriosis manifests in different ways. And we're seeing a lot of research now that it's suggesting that endometriosis is it's like cancer. You may have different subtypes, that are respond different ways to different types of treatment. We're still in the early stages of that research, but, hopefully with funding, we'll get there. But, I would say start there. There are some really good patient groups online. We have EndoWhat. It's like at EndoWhat on Instagram, Facebook, all of the pages. That's a great place to start. And we also reference out often to other patient groups so that people who are working, day in and day out to give really good advice.
Traditionally, as women, very often we would go to the doctors and hear, it'll go away. Sort of like the whole headache thing. It's like, it'll go away, and I know that continues. It really does still happen. So we just have to continue to persevere, right? And whoever's in our circle, if we're fortunate enough to even have a circle to help advocate for us. I know that when I was younger, I had a lot of pain. I also was very fortunate to find a doctor who figured it out. And that was, some time ago. So, but I have friends who also have not been that fortunate. And they too have had to, go from doctor to doctor, even town to town and city to city. It could be expensive as well. What do you do if you don't even have the insurance for something like this and you don't have the means, the funds, none of it? What do you do?
That is an issue that we're trying to work on right now. I know. And I think it starts with widespread awareness so that everybody understands the impact of this disease. Women's health historically has been undervalued, dismissed in this country in research and medical education, basically across the board, So what we have to do is work with different collaborators in government, the NIH, people who are trying to do a good job, but say, no, we have to put more attention on this. We have to work together so that more research is done and we have more momentum, so that those institutional hurdles, the hurdles with insurance and other financial hurdles can be lessened or torn down. Honestly, right now, a lot of excision surgeons, not all of them, but a lot of them actually operate out of network. So we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars in a hospital bill, like credit cards maxed out, savings depleted, or patients are relegated to subpar care. That's what happens, relegated to continual birth control or, painkillers to try to just survive every day. And it's not their fault. It's a failure of the system.
Right. Has this film been shown to doctors and hospitals as well?
It has, yes. So, it just premiered on PBS last month, and it will continue to be available on PBS for the next year, which is really exciting. But we've also launched a medical school screening tour, and we screened at 5 medical schools in spring of this year, and we'll do 5 more in the fall. And I actually co-taught a class in bioethics at Harvard Medical School this spring, where we showed the film to first-year medical students. And then we talk about all of the ethical issues raised by endometriosis and by the film. Things like, the long delay to diagnosis and what is feeding that. It's gender bias in medicine, it's gaslighting, the menstrual taboo and stigma and shame about talking about women's bodies, women's parts below the belt, and a reticence to that. I have a 15-year-old, by the way, and today she'll probably kill me later. Sorry, Sophia, but she'll be like, oh, started my period. And I was like, oh, well, let's talk about that. And she's like, Mom, I don't want to talk about my period. I was like, I'm sorry, you're going to have to talk about your period with me, but still there's this resistance, to talking about issues or talking about issues like in a hushed tone. So we're trying to, go past that. Go
ahead.
Yeah, no. I was just going to hit the other ethical issues at play, which are these financial barriers to care, the institutional barriers to care. It's not just endometriosis. We're talking about all of women's health, all of healthcare, with these financial barriers to care told through the lens of this single disease.
How do we even get around that, though? I mean, that is a really tough one. I mean, you've got to get to the point where medicine is about the person and not always about the dollar. But how do you do that here in this country? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
It's not just one thing, it's many
No.
things. And you know, you kind of have to have, you know, a PhD in like diplomacy and strategy to make this happen. But I mean, you do
Yeah.
it by collaborators, and that is the power of film and
Yeah.
individual stories, because I think all of us, you know, as humans, we resonate with stories and that human story, you know, that human connection, and that's a lot easier to understand than when you just hear numbers all the time and big data. And but if you give someone, you know, an opportunity to connect, like you did with Laura's father, for example, it stays with you a different way than if I just rattled off, you know, a page full of numbers to you. You
Well,
get it, you get it in a different way. Yeah.
that's why this film was really special and very valuable. I very often found myself doing this because it was painful for me to watch what these women and young girls were going through and how difficult it was for them to find the help and the care that they needed, but they persevered. They kept at it. They had caring families. You know, again, may we all have that. And I always think about those who don't, you know, so we do have to train our medical people, right? I mean, this, in my opinion, this really should be you know, something that all OBGYNs and gynecologists, that they all, you know, are trained in school. Is that something that perhaps a film like this can make an impact and get that to change?
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly our goal, you know,
Yeah.
so that we can get those frontline providers educated. We can start a medical school. You know, that's why we're doing these special screenings. And we've gotten really tremendous feedback. I'll tell you, when we screened it for these first year medical students at Harvard, and that was our first screening at the medical schools. And I didn't know how it was going to be taken. And after it, I was just so heartened because they were outraged that this was going on and really wanting to do something about it. Still, like, you
That's
know,
great.
we finished the class and I'm walking down the building, you know, down the hall of the building, and I still have people asking me questions. And that's when I knew, I was like, okay, you know, we're onto something here. This really, film can be a tool for change because it sparks the conversation. It sparks the possibilities. Like, because then it's like, what can they go do with that? You know, these really brilliant minds who are passionately engaged, and no matter what they specialize in,
Yeah.
I was like, hey, listen, guys, I was telling them, I was like, no matter what you specialize in, you will meet someone with endometriosis, and I hope that you will believe them. First of all, believe their symptoms when they tell them, and then second, be better equipped to refer them to a specialist. That's a win.
Yeah. That's really saying something, that this was screened at Harvard Medical School and medical professionals were taking this film very seriously. Kudos to you for that, you know. But this wasn't a film just about their stories. You also included the medical community in this film. It was very, very well done and very well researched. How did you select the people that you even talked to in the film? Again, it was very comprehensive. I was quite impressed with this movie, quite a bit.
Yeah, thank you. We talked to so many people, even so many
Yeah.
more people that actually, you know, were in the film. Because, you know, I started researching endometriosis, and I would, you know, call someone up and interview them. And I would always ask them, who should I talk to? Who else do you think? Who's doing good work in the field? Who should I talk to? And without fail, everyone had at least one or two names for me. So I did it that way. I mean, we talked to 30 or 40 experts, you know,
Yeah.
and not just
Yeah.
in endometriosis and not just in women's health, you know, but I talked to people like Greg Gonsalves, for example, really brilliant guy who runs the Global Health Policy Institute at Yale University. But he was one of the first members of ACT UP, which is the big, you know, group that really changed HIV and AIDS care in this country in the 80s and 90s. So I talked to I talked to him a lot about how do we use messaging and how do we use teams to affect, you know, change in healthcare in a large way. How do we, you know, mobilize people with messaging and with film and other means? And it was really enlightening. So I didn't just talk to people in the medical field. I talked to, you know, a huge, you know, swath of people that had tangential, you know, knowledge of what we should be looking at, you know, beyond endometriosis. And it was very helpful in looking at how we should be, I guess, putting the film together in a way that can, really hopefully resonate with different people, whether they have this disease or not. You should care about the disease because it's just indicative of so many other issues going on in our lives within the healthcare system, especially in the US.
Yeah, how does one initially get endometriosis? Okay, fact or fiction? Because I remember when I was younger, I used to hear, oh, it happens when girls have premarital sex too young. And I remember
Oh my
thinking, that
gosh.
doesn't, right? You know what I mean? Like all the crazy myths out there. So could you demystify that a little bit and talk to us, right? And talk to us about how does one get that? Or is it genetic? Or is it a little combination of everything?
Well,
But
we
not
do
the
know.
one, not the myth. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, seriously, all the things that we hear, right?
Right.
There is a 7 times increased genetic risk, we know, between mothers and daughters and amongst sisters. So there is a genetic link. And I will say my own daughters, I have 2 young daughters, and they were the impetus for this film and our other film, Endo What. Like, just, I think we all, by the way, try to make change in whatever way we can, but we are compelled to action when someone we love is threatened in a way that goes beyond when we ourselves are threatened. But so there is a genetic link. We don't have a definitive answer to what causes it. It's probably more than one thing.
Right.
There is research, for example, I know there was research that with female fetuses that were lost in pregnancy, and they found the same incidence of endometriosis in the fetuses, so like 9 to 10%.
Wow.
So it's probably something that is laid down early. But again, it manifests in different ways. There may be epigenetics involved. So epigenetics is when something in the environment kind of triggers something, whether it's environmental toxins. There's a lot of research that shows that environmental toxins may play a role in some way, which makes sense. And it makes sense for many reasons. I try to eat clean, so to speak, where I try to eat organic as I can, as I can afford it. Because I hear that a lot of times people are like, oh, I can't afford it. I mean, all the, the organic prices, I mean, there's a really great nonprofit website, by the way, called the Environmental Working Group, and everybody should know about it. It's ewg.org, nonpartisan nonprofit. And what they will do is they have like the dirty dozen. So if you're like, listen, I can't afford to eat, clean all the time, go and look, and they'll tell you the 12 fruits and vegetables that you should try to buy organic, because they have the highest toxic load. And then they have, the ones that are like the clean, that you can really try to, hard to eat clean. And so it's really helpful. And also they have a lot of, they have something with like cosmetics and lotions and shampoos and soaps and things like that, perfumes. So you can enter in whatever cosmetics you use, and it'll tell you from a 0 to 10 how toxic that cosmetic is. Very interesting.
Wow.
So I've used it quite a bit, not just on like what I eat or put on my body, but what my daughters put on their bodies. And as much as we can, we try to, get things that are the lighter toxic load.
Your hopes for the film, please. Because now also that it's available on PBS, that's really fantastic. More people will be able to access it and see it, and then tell their friends, family, and doctors about it. But what are your hopes for it?
I mean, my hopes that it continues to make an impact, not only in the mainstream. It will be available starting in the fall in other countries. So it will, go country by country, different languages. And I think it will be available on streaming in the US on a platform at some point soon. So that's the first step, is that widespread awareness to people who've never heard about this disease, so that we build that. Second is medical education. So using as a tool for doctors, for nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians' assistants, so that they understand endometriosis and can better recognize those symptoms. And then a lot of the work that we're doing is policy in DC. So trying to generate research funding, working with collaborators, working with the White House Gender Policy Council, the NIH, both sides of Congress, Republican, Democrat. We have really great supporters on both sides of the aisle, both in the House and the Senate, to generate that research funding and to hopefully decrease those institutional burdens like we just talked about, so that every person with endometriosis is not relegated to that subpar care because of financial, the deficiencies, so that they can get the treatment, the best, the gold star treatment, because everybody deserves that access to good care.
In fact, you touched upon that in the film, how politically on both sides of the aisle, there was cooperation, right, to get funding and to research endometriosis. I was thrilled to see that. But of course, it had to hit home personally, but it happened, right? So that was, if you just briefly want to tell our audience about what that was about.
Of course. Well, I mean, anybody I think who knows politics, it's just there are so many issues. And a lot of times it does take a personal connection with someone for them to really understand and become like the champion for it. And in this case, it was Senator Orrin Hatch, longtime Republican senator from Utah, who is, for many people, would not be the obvious first, the person that they would say, but his granddaughter has endometriosis and he saw her suffer for years. And he just knew the real human impact of the disease. And he was like, what can I do? Tell me what I can do and I will do it. So he brought Senator Elizabeth Warren on board, and they worked together to get, for the first time in history, research funding for endometriosis from the Department of Defense. So that was a big coup. And since then, since Senator Hatch retired, Senator Mitt Romney has taken his place on the Republican side and worked hand in hand with Senator Warren to keep that bipartisan support going in the Senate. And there's also a 31-member bipartisan House endometriosis caucus. So on the House side, there are several representatives on both sides of the aisle working on it as well.
I found that extraordinary. I mean, it was like an aha moment for me in the film. I'm like, oh, if only this could happen with most things, right, in Washington. I thought it was extraordinary. Talk to me about raising money, raising funds for research. How can people get involved, please?
Yes. Well, the biggest ask we're doing right now is we had a meeting in DC last month, where we initially asked for $50 million earmarked for endometriosis research to the NIH for fiscal year 2025. So right now, over the next few months, we'll be drumming up support in Congress to try to get different Congress people behind this idea. As every year, the political climate is fraught with bipartisanism and trying to get anything, especially with, debt talks and everything like the debt ceiling. It's a difficult time. But if we communicate, how urgent this issue is and, in women's health is, then we can get that support. So what can people do? They can reach out to their congressperson. I know people say that and people are like, oh, what does it really do? But actually they keep a log of it. When people call or write and you say, we need more endometriosis research funding, they do keep a log of it. So call, right, and say, we need this. It's going to be introduced in fiscal year 2025 for appropriations for $50 million in research funding for endometriosis. We'd love it if you would support it.
Incredible. And also private funding. There must be some private funding, of course.
There are, of course, foundations and different corporations who donate, but not as much as, it'd be great if more did. And I think that it's another thing about the widespread awareness. I was just talking to someone about this the other day, because we've applied for grants for some of these big foundations, and it's just like, it's difficult if they don't already know the impact. But if they know and understand the impact, then it's, then they get it, and then they are more open to funding and funding big programs and everything like that. So it all starts with awareness. That's what we're working on with the film. Yeah.
Wonderful. Such a great conversation. Is there anything you'd like to tell our audience before I let you go about this film, about endometriosis, and also about what you're working on, please?
Of course. Thank you. Of course, you can see Below the Belt, like we said, on PBS. You can follow us on social media at EndoWhat. But beyond that, I would say this, and it's more of a personal message, that if you are struggling, physically in your health, endometriosis or anything else, please don't give up. Don't think there are not answers for you. It may not be a conventional answer. Like if you're going to your doctor and you're feeling dismissed or, not believed, don't be scared to, go get a second and third opinion and go online, because now more than any, of course, there's a lot of misinformation online. I'm not saying, that online is going to be the answer to everything, but there are a lot of good people doing good work, trying to educate, who can help you go further than if you just stuck to your doctor's office sometimes. So I speak from experience on that. And then so many other people that I've seen get answers going that way. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I know you've been traveling quite a bit for mostly for business and also for pleasure. So you managed to get this in, and I'm excited about it because I really want to push this message out so more and more people hear it. So thank you again. And everybody, you can find our conversation with Shannon on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all video podcast platforms. And then, of course, we transferred over into an audio podcast, which would be, iHeartRadio. We're on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast. Just look up Deborah Kobylt Live and Shannon Cohn, and you will find our interview. So please spread the word. This is an important conversation. It really is. And I'm sure if not you, then someone has endometriosis. Important conversation. So thanks, everybody. Also, thanks to my friend Terry Hammermish. She's the one who introduced me to you and to this film, and I really appreciate that very much. She's a dear friend, and I'm just very grateful to her for that. So thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'm your host, Deborah Zara Kobylt, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.